Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to my next election prediction video. Today we're going to be looking at my updated 2022 US Senate map and where I stand on these races as of today, September 17th, 2022. We are less than 2 months away now from the midterms. I believe we have, let's look, we have 51 days, roughly, about 52 if you round up, until we are at November 8th, the big day with all the elections. We're getting so close, guys. It's been a long journey. Um, Honestly, I'm kind of happy that 2022 is coming to an end so that we can focus on 2024. I think that that'll be, because I've been thinking and talking about 2022 for quite some time now. But yeah, we're finally starting to see more polls come out. It is past Labor Day. We're in full election mode, full general election mode. We got a lot new polls, and yeah, let's just get right into it. So, Democrats are still doing pretty well relative. According to 538, Joe Biden's approval rating is pretty much where it was last time around. He's disapproved of by 11%, but that is still a lot better than where he was just 2 months ago when he was down by almost 20%. So, Biden, getting, being more productive, getting things done, passing the Inflation Reduction Act. He's gotten back on the campaign trail. He made a stop in Maryland earlier this week. And yeah, he seems to be a lot more, um, he seems to be a lot more energetic, a lot more alive, honestly. And that is a good thing for Democrats. And if you look at the generic ballot polls, according to 538, we were talking about a potential Labor Day surge for Republicans like there was in 2014. What actually happened is that Democrats actually went up on the generic ballot, not by much, but right now they are leading by a point and a half on the generic ballot. This is not nearly as good as their leads were in 2018 or 2020. But Republicans held the lead, from November 2021 all the way through to early August. They had pretty much they were leading for 9 months until Democrats were finally able to overcome them. That in large part has to do with the extreme nominees that the GOP has picked, with Biden's rising approval rating, and especially with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So, yeah, we're going to get right into it now. So, we're going to start by filling out the safe Republican and Democratic states. We'll start with the Democrats' safe states first. These are states that are going to go to either party by over 15%. There's really no chance that the opposition party wins these seats. Washington, I do want to address because there was a Trafalgar poll out of the state that only showed Patty Murray up by 3 points against Tiffany Smiley. I do not. Oh wait, I forgot Maryland too. I do not believe this poll at all, especially since it was conducted around the same time in which polls in Colorado and Pennsylvania showed greater leads for Democrats. And a similar case in Vermont with Peter Welch only being up by 7 points. I could have believed that against Christina Nolan, but I mean, the GOP, Trafalgar does not have a track record in Washington or Vermont. Believe me, I went back through presidential elections, Senate elections, couldn't find any polls from Trafalgar. I think that they're just really trying to reach into blue territory right now to kind of, distract Democrats from, their more vulnerable seats, get them to focus on more solid blue territory. So yeah, I do not believe those poll numbers at all. And I really, I know I said last time that I was not going to talk about Washington again unless something happened. I might mention it here or there, but I had to address this poll. I think it's complete bull, and I just had to, talk about it. So for the safe Republican states, we're going to go over them. We got Idaho, Alaska, Kansas, both of Oklahoma special elections. Missouri, because Erica Greitens did not win the GOP nomination. The independent John Wood has also dropped out. Eric Schmidt was the right choice for the GOP. And Trudy Bush Valentine, well, she does seem like a credible candidate. She is not going to come anywhere close to winning. It could be likely, but I just don't see it right now. Arkansas, Louisiana might go into a runoff because, they have the open primary, the jungle primary system where Republicans and Democrats run on the ballot. And John Kennedy was forced into a runoff last time in 2016. But he would win. He won that primary or that runoff overwhelmingly. And if a similar situation happens, again in 2022, really doesn't mean anything. Just means that the election goes on a little bit longer, and John Kennedy's overwhelming landslide victory is delayed. But I do think that he is going to avoid a runoff similar to Bill Cassidy. It does look like in the polling data he is, reaching over 50% and leading against, his Republican and Democratic opponents by substantial amounts. Alabama and South Carolina, Tim Scott's very popular. He's going to siphon off some of the black vote. Republicans are going to have a good year in, South Carolina. Not like, it's a swing state, but they're gonna do all right. I think the governor's election is personally more interesting, and we'll get to that when I put out my governor's election prediction. Kentucky, Rand Paul does underperform, but Charles Booker's too progressive of a candidate to really get anywhere close to winning. And yeah, I just don't really see it. Indiana, Todd Young was only up by 3 in the most recent poll, but it was conducted by his Democratic opponent Thomas McDermott Jr.'s campaign. So take that with a grain of salt. Indiana really, was competitive back in 2016, but that was because Evan Bayh was running against Todd Young, and I think Young is going to be overwhelmingly reelected in the deep red state of Indiana. So as you can notice, I don't have a likely state, or one of the states that is not, that was safe last time is no longer safe for the GOP. I'm not going to reveal what it is just yet. I've moved it down to likely. But yeah, let's just get right into the likely states. These are states that are going to go to either party by over 5 to 15 percentage points. And they are not necessarily super competitive, but they are, um, you know, they are worth some competitive nature. The first one, we're going to start with the Democrats' likely states. The first one is the state of Colorado. Now, I do understand that Joe O'Dea is a good candidate, and that he can, cut into Michael Bennett's margins in the suburbs, but the problem for him is that, I will say that I think that there is some truth to the fact, that right wingers on YouTube are saying that Joe O'Dea is not going to get good rural margins, and that's what's going to cost them. But I feel like they don't necessarily understand the fact that O'Dea, Trump got really good margins in the rural areas in 2020, and he still lost Colorado by double digits. And so, I think that excuse is kind of invalid. O'Dea still has yet to lead in a single poll, and Michael Bennett survived a red wave in 2010. He survived despite being down in the polls. Colorado does sometimes overestimate Republican support. So Colorado could be a sleeper race in November if things get better for Republicans. There have been polls that show the race close, but still none that, show O'Dea with the lead, and all the ones that are showing it particularly close are Republican sponsored polls. And I am going to add New Hampshire into the likely Democratic column. I did say that I was most likely to do that. Don Bolduc won the primary in New Hampshire. He is a very extreme candidate. Chuck Morse came a lot closer than I expected to winning this primary. And, New Hampshire, they had their primary this week. It was the last primary of the year. We're officially done with primaries. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the video, but Maggie Hassan's a very strong incumbent. She defeated Kelly Ayotte. If Krista Nunu had ran, I think that this race would have been almost an automatic pickup for the GOP, because while Hassan is a good incumbent, Krista Nunu would still get overwhelming support and would probably have defeated her by 4 or 5 percentage points. Kelly Ayotte, I think, similar case scenario, but would not have done nearly as well as Krista Nunu would have. Chuck Morse could have made this race interesting, but he lost the primary. And now that Don Bolduc, a pretty extreme candidate who is trying to moderate his positions, is, but is still, very, very extreme. He says the 2020 election was stolen, or he has said that in the past. He's been trying to walk that back. And, considering he barely won the primary, I just don't see a path to victory for Bolduc right now. I could see it in a best case scenario, but Hassan is a very good incumbent. Yeah, New Hampshire, I think Hassan will win by about 5 or 6 percentage points now, and I think that I'm going to keep, New Hampshire in the likely column. There was a new poll finally out of the state of New Hampshire. After months of waiting, New Hampshire's really a state that's been lagging with polling data. Real Clear Politics still hasn't updated their average from April. Jesus Christ. In an Emerson poll, in New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan was defeating Don Bolduc by 11 points. There are a lot of undecideds in this poll, and you might point to the fact that this Data for Progress poll only showed Hassan up by 4. But what you have to remember is that Data for Progress, it tends to overestimate Republican support. They did the same thing in the New York special election. I think, it's kind of a tactic to get more money into New Hampshire. But while New Hampshire is going to be competitive, And Maggie Hassan is more vulnerable than most Democratic senators like Michael Bennet. She's still going to win overwhelmingly in the state, at least for New Hampshire standards. I really don't see her losing as of right now. For the likely Republican states, we have quite a few. We have a couple. First of all, we have Iowa. I'm sticking strong with keeping Iowa in the likely column, especially after more polling data has been released that shows Chuck Grassley only up by 4 points. On average, he's up by 7 points against Michael Franken, and the most recent poll was conducted by Franken's campaign. And while I will say that Grassley's last election in 2016, when he won by 25 percentage points, did show originally a competitive race between him and Patty Judge, at least for Grassley standards. Around September, Grassley started to pull away in the polls, and that was really what led him to his landslide, another landslide. That hasn't happened yet, and I think that Chuck Grassley is probably going to win by 13 or 14 points. I think it will be under 15%, but Democrats do not need to invest in Iowa. I think it'll be more of a sacrificial. I think that Michael Franken's a bit of a sacrificial lamb, but he will make this grass. He will most likely make this Grassley's most competitive election since 1980. So yeah, that's all I gotta say in Iowa. In Utah, I am moving this down to likely. Evan McMullen was leading in a poll sponsored by his campaign, which I don't think that Evan McMullen is up in Utah right now. Mike Lee, though, is not the strongest candidate, and McMullen does have, an appeal to a lot of Republican voters. And I'm not exactly sure how confident I am that McMullen's caucuses with the GOP in Utah. I know that he, switched to an independent and ran against Trump in 2016, and that, he would probably face some flack for that if he ran against Lee in the primary. But he probably would have won that primary overwhelmingly. Lee is way too conservative for a lot of tradition, or is too extreme for a lot of traditional conservatives in Utah, the Mitt Romney, Orrin Hatch types. And I do think that Evan McMullen, will probably get this race under 15, and I do think that there is a higher chance, than not as of right now that he stays an independent in the Senate. I do think that he will not caucus with the GOP, but it is still very possible, and I still think Lee is going to win overwhelmingly. But there have been, some polls that show him potentially vulnerable. The final likely state for Republicans is the state of Florida. Marco Rubio does seem to be in a little bit of trouble against Val Demings. There have been new polls that have come out showing him only up barely. But you have to remember that Florida polls are pretty inaccurate, and Marco Rubio is an electoral juggernaut. On average, he leads by about 3 points. Some of these polls have shown him failing to reach 50%, but I mean, Rubio has been able, was able to overwhelmingly outperform Trump in 2016. I think he's going to do the same again in 2022, but I do think that this will be one of probably his closest election. I'm expecting right now a 6 to 7 point victory for Marco Rubio. Polls in Florida showed Biden up by almost 3 points on election day. In 2020, Trump won it by 3 points. So, and with Florida trending to the right and with Marco Rubio being pretty much, a very strong candidate, I do think that Val Demings is going to come up short in the Senate race. So that is all the likely states that we have as of right now, or yeah, for this prediction. Now we're going to go into the lean and tilt states. We're going to start with the lean states, which are states that that will be determined by, or that are states that are going to be going to either party by anywhere from 1 to 5 percentage points. These are states that are highly competitive, but do have a strong enough lead for a certain party, or strong enough partisan lean for a certain candidate or party that it could go the other way, but it is hard to imagine it doing so. The first state that I think is the most evident of that last part of that statement, that we have the first lean Republican state, is the state of Ohio. JD Vance is really struggling in this state, and when I mean really struggling, I mean it. I thought that this race, would have been more competitive if Josh Mandel won the primary. Tim Ryan is a very good candidate, and he does seem to be doing a lot better. Vance has gotten a recent surge in polls. He has led in the most recent polls, but we're starting to see realistic numbers for Tim Ryan. During the summer, we saw these overwhelming margins, and I said, don't buy it. Vance is going to win. But now I'm more apprehensive about that. I still expect Vance to win this race, and I don't think that, Tim Ryan would need a lot for this state to go blue. But seeing these narrow margins for Tim Ryan or JD Vance really makes me think that this race is actually getting really, really competitive. And I think a large part of that is that even though Ohio is trending to the right, the Trump is a main reason for that. Mike DeWine, yes, he did outperform his poll numbers in 2018. He's going to win overwhelmingly in 2022. Not a doubt about that. Even though Nan Willey is a credible candidate, DeWine is still pretty popular. But all that aside, JD Vance is not Donald Trump. He acts like Trump. He wants to be Trump, even though, he used to be a pretty big critic of the former president. But he just simply does not have that same appeal that Trump does in the state of Ohio. And I think that that's going to hurt him. I do expect right now that JD Vance wins by about 3 or 4 percentage points. It's going to take a lot for me to say Ohio is going to go to Tim Ryan. This race could be likely still for Vance, but am really starting to get a lot more confident in Tim Ryan's ability to win this race. The next lean state that we have for Republicans is the state of North Carolina. This is a jump up from previously where I had it as a tilt Republican state. North Carolina, I think, is a more probable flip than Ohio. Ted Budd is a good candidate. Pat McCrory probably would have lost the state for Republicans. But Sherry Beasley is a unique type of candidate for the Senate seat. For a long time, Democrats have been nominating, white nominees that have not been able to bring out the black vote in North Carolina by, of substantial margins. Obviously they did get the black vote, but a real reason why why Democrats have had trouble in North Carolina, particularly white nominees, except for Kay Hagan in 2008, she was an exception. She did get blown out of the she did lose in 2014, but a large part, to Deborah K. Ross and Cal Cunningham's losses were that they were against Republican. Richard Burr was, a very strong incumbent. Tom Tillis was extremely vulnerable. Cal Cunningham should have won that Senate race, even though he did have that sexual misconduct scandal. But I think a large part as to why Democrats did so poorly in North Carolina relatively compared to how they were supposed to do in 2016 and 2020 is because of Trump's effect. Trump is very, good at bringing out voters across the country and outperforming polls. And I do think that North Carolina is going to be, and I think with Trump not on the ballot, I think that that does, help Sherry Beasley and her being the first Black Democratic nominee for Senate in a very long time. I think that that really does give her a good chance at winning this race. This race is a lot more competitive than I originally anticipated it to be. And I think Ted Budd's going to win. I don't think he's the best candidate for this race, but he's 100 times better than Oz or Masters or Walker in the other battleground states. And I think Sherry Beasley's ability to win really just depends on how well she can do with young black voters, just like how Obama did in 2008. So right now, I think Ted Budd wins by about 2 or 3 points in North Carolina, maybe 1 point, but I still think it's above a 1% threshold. But keep your eye on this race. Beasley is underperforming Biden's numbers. Biden's polling average in the state, 538, had him up on election day by 1 point. Beasley's only up by half a point, so that should concern her. But I think right now Ted Budd's narrowly favored, but this race could be, surprisingly close. I think we're just gonna have to wait for more data. For the lean Democratic states, I see a couple. The first one is Pennsylvania. This isn't really a surprise. Dr. Oz's campaign just really has not picked up the momentum yet. We keep hearing that Republicans are going to narrow up the Senate. They're going to narrow up Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and I do believe that. I really do. But Oz, there was signs that he was starting to narrow up this race. But, with the Trafalgar poll that came out that showed him only down by 4. But the thing is that Trafalgar did show, Trump winning in 2020 in the state of Pennsylvania. And then, look at this. Echelon Insights, I don't think Fetterman's up by 21 points, but I mean, in Raba research, just, it really does not, look good for Dr. Oz right now. I think this is a race that the GOP has royally screwed up in, and I think Doug Mastriano is going to hurt Oz even more. Him being an outsider from New Jersey, I'm not going to get into the meme stuff again, or into the memes about, Dr. Oz being from New Jersey, but I get it. I get the message that John Fetterman's trying to make. This is, Oz is a carpetbagger who, doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. He's not your average working class Pennsylvanian. He's a rich billionaire from New Jersey, and that's going to really hurt him. Oz can win this race. It's still attainable for him, but I think Fetterman wins by about 4 points right now. Pennsylvania polls are a lot more accurate than usual, and the Real Clear Politics average, which was pretty accurate in 2020, they had Biden up by 1.2% on election day, and he won by exactly that. They have Fetterman up by 4, and I think that that's a reasonable margin. This race could honestly be likely at this point. Things just still get stay so badly for Dr. Oz. I don't think he's going to lose by double digits. That's ludicrous, but it's certainly not a good sign for him, because then he has more, voters to catch up with. He has to, he has more, ground to build, and we have less than 2 months till the election. And if, Oz is down by the same amount he's up now, I'm not putting this race in favor for him, but come election day, I'm just not. So that's my take on Pennsylvania. I think John Fetterman will win, and that is good news for Democrats. They've now flipped a seat in the Senate. Next lean state, Arizona. Mark Kelly is doing very well against Blake Masters. Masters does seem to be narrowing up the race, but that is expected. And Masters has just really been a bit of a he has lied about his stance on abortion. He's trying to pivot more to the center now. He's trying to portray Mark Kelly as an extremist on abortion, even though, Masters has very extreme positions on a lot of social and fiscal issues in Arizona. And the thing is that Kelly is a moderate. I don't care what the right likes to say, but Kelly is, while he's not Sinema and he's not Manchin, he does buck with Biden on a number of things. He's criticized Biden on immigration. He's voted against Biden's climate policies, and he voted against his Secretary of Labor pick. So, I mean, Kelly, and I think that a large part of that does have to do with the fact that Kelly is trying to appeal to moderate voters. He's very popular in Arizona, and he's an extremely strong incumbent, and while Masters can win this race because it is Arizona, it's still a very, very competitive state. I think Kelly right now wins by 2 or 3 points. I think it'll be slightly larger than his 2020 margin of victory. I just don't see Masters appeal in the state of Arizona, especially in Maricopa County. I think Kelly's going to do a lot better in that. But the governor's race could, Carrie Lake could help Masters, even though she's a really bad candidate. She seems to be outperforming Masters by a landslide on a lot of these polls, but we will talk about that tomorrow or whenever I release my next governor prediction. Georgia's the final lean state on the map. Warnock is doing pretty well against Walker. I was expecting to put this race into, I was contemplating putting this race into the tilt column. But, considering how, Walker was regaining the lead in a lot of the polls, but I don't see him being able to get, over 50% on election day. And I think if he's forced into a runoff, Warnock will more likely than not win. Also, Quinnipiac showed a poll with very few undecideds, showing Warnock up by 6 points. And even if you add all the undecideds to Walker and you include the margin of error, Warnock still wins. Echelon Insights. It's pretty much, they show Warnock up by 10. I don't believe that. And some of these polls, have shown a very close race. I think Georgia's going to be very, very competitive. But I just don't see Walker being able to get over the hump. I just really don't. I think he can. This is not a lost cause for the GOP, but Walker's just such a bad candidate, and he's going to severely underperform Brian Kemp in the governor's race. So yeah, that is my 2 cents on Georgia. So the final two states, these are the tilt states, and these are states that are going to go to either party by to less than 1 percentage point. These are the true toss-up states. So you can see Democrats have now reached 50 senators, which means that if there is a tie in these state, if these two states go Republican and there is a tie, Vice President Kamala Harris will break that tie, and Democrats will maintain a 50-50 in the Senate. As their loss in either of these states, in Nevada, presumptively in Nevada, would be canceled out by Pennsylvania. But I do think that Nevada still goes to Cortez Masto, and I think, Democrats are going to end up with 51 seats through Nevada. Adam Laxalt's a very good candidate, but Cortez Masto seems to be doing very, very well. And when you look at, the amount of work that Laxalt needs to do in Las Vegas, against, someone who's more likely than not, going to outperform Biden with Hispanic voters in the state, I do, while I do think Cortez Masto is going to underperform Biden and the rest of the state, if she can keep up a good, margin in Clark County with Las Vegas, she can still win. And I think Laxalt, will do better than Joe Heck did in 2016. This race is a total toss-up. It could absolutely go his direction, but abortion is going to hurt him. Laxalt, is a better candidate than most of these GOP nominees, but I just don't see him being able to get over the hump right now, but it absolutely could happen. I would not be surprised if Nevada goes red this year. Finally, in the state of Wisconsin, this state is still very close. Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes are in a dead heat here. I think Johnson, though, I am moving this back to the Republican column. I think Johnson narrowly ekes out a victory. He has been leading in the most recent polling data in the state. And, I do think that while Mandela Barnes is not the best candidate, he is doing significantly better than anyone really expected. Marquette has Ron Johnson only up by one. Civics, same thing. The NRC, this poll conducted by that was sponsored by the NRC only has, NRSC only has, Johnson up by four. And Wisconsin's polls, while have been very inaccurate during years of the Trump effect, with Trump on the ballot, they were pretty accurate in 2018. Tammy Baldwin and Tony Evers were pretty much spot on in their Senate and governor's races. And, I do think that Johnson's narrowly favored right now, but Milwaukee turnout's going to jump up for Mandela Barnes, and Wisconsin is a lot more competitive than I originally anticipated it. But right now, I think that Barnes is going to do just so badly with the white working class voters in the western part of the state that it can narrowly put Johnson over the hump. But I do expect Wisconsin to be very close. It could go back up to lean if we see some more decent polls, coming out, or some more polls that show Ron Johnson in a pretty favorable position. But I think I'm expecting Wisconsin to stay in a toss up until Election Day. So in the final map, we have Democrats at 51 Senate seats, Republicans at 49. Democrats gain a seat for Pennsylvania. They still have to work around Kyrsten Sinema and or Joe Manchin. They can afford to lose one of those two, or any other senator that just decides to buck with the party, but they can't afford to lose two of them. So yeah, so Democrats gain seats in the Senate. This is a pretty favorable result for the Democratic Party. And, the problem for the GOP is that they overturned Roe v. Wade. The Senate was always attainable for the Democratic Party. I didn't think that they were favored in it until, June when I, first put the Democrats up in the Senate. My first two predictions, I had the Republicans at 51 to 49. And, I don't see Republicans being able to win the Senate right now. They absolutely can. But with Democrats gaining on the generic ballot and looking like they're in a really good position in the House, which is something that I never expected, it brings into question, the polling error would have to be so big for Republicans to win the Senate. And, I have, seen Nate Silver's article on 538 that has talked about, how polls tend to be adjusted, in a certain direction after major polling misses that underestimated one party or the other. And, with Democrats having outperformed in this House special elections, I think that this year could potentially have a pro-Republican polling bias. Not saying that's going to happen, not saying that we should 100% expect it, but I think it is very possible considering the circumstances that we are in. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Share the video. Turn on notifications so you don't miss another one of my videos. Check out my non-political channel, Interactor127, and my Conrad's channel, Growlings666. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics, and I'll be back with my governor election prediction soon. See you.